Paper 53, The Lucifer Rebellion, Part 2 of 3, based on the Urantia Book, Paper 53. Nature of the conflict. Upon the outbreak of the Urantia Rebellion, Michael took counsel of his Paradise brother Emmanuel. Following this momentous conference, Michael announced that he would pursue the same policy which had characterized his dealings with similar upheavals in the past, an attitude of non-interference. At the time of this rebellion and the two which preceded it, there was no absolute and personal sovereign authority in the universe of Nebadon. Michael ruled by divine right, as vicegerent of the Universal Father, but not yet in his own personal right. He had not completed his bestowal career. He had not yet been vested with all power in heaven and on earth. From the outbreak of rebellion to the day of his enthronement as sovereign ruler of Nebadon, Michael never interfered with the rebel forces of Lucifer. They were allowed to run a free course for almost 200,000 years of Urantia time. Christ Michael now has ample power and authority to deal promptly, even summarily, with such outbreaks of disloyalty, but we doubt that this sovereign authority would lead him to act differently if another such upheaval should occur. Since Michael elected to remain aloof from the actual warfare of the Lucifer Rebellion, Gabriel called his personal staff together on Urantia and, in council with the Most Highs, elected to assume command of the loyal hosts of Satania. Michael remained on Selvington while Gabriel proceeded to Jerusalem, and establishing himself on the sphere dedicated to the Father, the same universal Father whose personality Lucifer and Satan had questioned, in the presence of the foregathered hosts of loyal personalities, he displayed the banner of Michael, the material emblem of the Trinity government of all creation, the three azure blue concentric circles on a white background. The Lucifer emblem was a banner of white with one red circle in the centre of which a black solid circle appeared. There was war in heaven. Michael's commander and his angels fought against the dragon, Lucifer, Satan, and the apostate princes. And the dragon and his rebellious angels fought but prevailed not. This war in heaven was not a physical battle as such a conflict might be conceived on Urantia. In the early days of the struggle, Lucifer held forth continuously in the planetary amphitheatre. Gabriel conducted an unceasing exposure of the rebel sophistries from his headquarters taken up near at hand. The various personalities present on the sphere, who were in doubt as to their attitude, would journey back and forth between these discussions until they arrived at a final decision. But this war in heaven was very terrible and very real. While displaying none of the barbarities so characteristic of physical warfare on the immature worlds, this conflict was far more deadly. Material life is in jeopardy in material combat, but the war in heaven was fought in terms of life eternal. A loyal seraphic commander. There were many noble and inspiring acts of devotion and loyalty which were performed by numerous personalities during the interim between the outbreak of hostilities and the arrival of the new system ruler and his staff. But the most thrilling of all these daring feats of devotion was the courageous conduct of Menoshia, the second in command of the Satania headquarters Seraphim. At the outbreak of rebellion on Jerusalem, the head of the seraphic host joined the Lucifer cause. This no doubt explains why such a large number of the Fourth Order, the system administrator Seraphim, went astray. The seraphic leader was spiritually blinded by the brilliant personality of Lucifer. His charming ways fascinated the lower orders of celestial beings. They simply could not comprehend that it was possible for such a dazzling personality to go wrong. Not long since, in describing the experiences associated with the onset of the Lucifer Rebellion, Menoshia said, "But my most exhilarating moment was the thrilling adventure connected with the Lucifer Rebellion when, as second seraphic commander, I refused to participate in the projected insult to Michael. and the powerful rebels sought my destruction by means of the liaison forces they had arranged. There was a tremendous upheaval on Jerusalem, but not a single loyal seraphim was harmed. Upon the default of my immediate superior, it devolved upon me to assume command of the angelic hosts of Jerusalem, as the titular director of the confused seraphic affairs of the system. I was morally upheld by the Melchizedeks, ably assisted by a majority of the material sons, deserted by a tremendous group of my own order, but magnificently supported by the ascendant mortals on Jerusalem. Having been automatically thrown out of the constellation circuits by the secession of Lucifer, we were dependent on the loyalty of our intelligence corps, who forwarded calls for help to Urantia from the nearby system of Rantulia, and we found that the kingdom of order, the intellect of loyalty, and the spirit of truth were inherently triumphant over rebellion, self-assertion, and so-called personal liberty. We were able to carry on until the arrival of the new system sovereign, the worthy successor of Lucifer. And immediately thereafter, I was assigned to the core of the Melchizedek receivership of Urantia, assuming jurisdiction over the loyal seraphic orders of the world of the traitorous Caligastia, who had proclaimed his sphere a member of the newly projected system of liberated worlds and emancipated personalities, proposed in the infamous Declaration of Liberty, issued by Lucifer in his call to the liberty-loving, free-thinking, and forward-looking intelligences of the misruled and maladministered worlds of Satania. This angel is still in service on Urantia, functioning as Associate Chief of the Seraphim. History of the Rebellion. The Lucifer Rebellion was system-wide. 37 seceding planetary princes swung their world administrations largely to the side of the arch-rebel. To carry his people with him. On the Melchizedeks, the people rallied enlisted under the Lucifer banner. And ever since have these loyal Panoptians served on the 7th Jerusalem transition world as the caretakers and builders of the Father Sphere and its surrounding 7 detention worlds. The Panoptians not only act as the literal custodians of these worlds, but they also execute the personal orders of Michael for the embellishment of these spheres for some future and unknown use. They do this work as they tarry en route to Urantia. Throughout this period, Caligastia was advocating the cause of Lucifer on Urantia. The Melchizedeks ably opposed the apostate planetary prince, but the sophistries of unbridled liberty and the delusions of self-assertion had every opportunity for deceiving the primitive peoples of a young and undeveloped world. All secession propaganda had to be carried on by personal effort, because the broadcast service and all other avenues of interplanetary communication were suspended by the action of the system circuit supervisors. Upon the actual outbreak of the insurrection, the entire system of Satania was isolated in both the constellation and the universe circuits. During this time, all incoming and outgoing messages were dispatched by seraphic agents and solitary messengers. The circuits to the fallen worlds were also cut off, so that Lucifer could not utilize this avenue for the furtherance of his nefarious scheme. And these circuits will not be restored so long as the arch-rebel lives within the confines of Satania. This was a Lanonendek rebellion. The higher orders of local universe sonship did not join the Lucifer secession, although a few of the life carriers stationed on the rebel planets were somewhat influenced by the rebellion of the disloyal princes. None of the Trinitized sons went astray. The Melchizedeks, archangels, and the brilliant evening stars were all loyal to Michael, and with Gabriel, valiantly contended for the Father's will and the Son's rule. No beings of paradise origin were involved in disloyalty. Together with the solitary messengers, they took up headquarters on the world of the Spirit, and remained under the leadership of the faithful of days of Urantia. None of the conciliators apostatized, nor did a single one of the celestial recorders go astray, but a heavy toll was taken on the Urantia companions and the mansion world teachers. Of the supreme order of seraphim, not an angel was lost, but a considerable group of the next order, the superior, were deceived and ensnared. Likewise, a few of the third or supervisor order of angels were misled, but the terrible breakdown came in the fourth group, the administrator angels, those seraphim who are normally assigned to the duties of the system capitals. Menotia saved almost 2/3 of them, but slightly over 1/3 followed their chief into the rebel ranks. 1/3 of all the Jerusalem cherubim attached to the administrator angels were lost with their disloyal seraphim. Of all the planetary angelic helpers, those assigned to the material suns, about 1/3 were deceived, and almost 10% of the transition ministers were ensnared. In symbol, John saw this when he wrote of the great red dragon, saying, "And his tail drew 1/3 part of the stars of heaven, and cast them down in the darkness." The greatest loss occurred in the angelic ranks, but most of the lower orders of intelligence were involved in disloyalty. Of the 681,217 material sons lost in Satania, 95% were casualties of the Lucifer Rebellion. Large numbers of midway creatures were lost on those individual planets whose planetary princes joined the Lucifer cause. In many respects, this rebellion was the most widespread and disastrous of all such occurrences in Nebadon. More personalities were involved in this insurrection than in both of the others, and it is to their everlasting dishonour that the emissaries of Lucifer and Satan spared not the infant training schools on the finaliter cultural planets, but rather sought to corrupt these developing minds in mercy salvaged from the evolutionary worlds. The ascending mortals were vulnerable, but they withstood the sophistries of rebellion better than the lower spirits, while many on the lower mansion worlds, those who had not attained final fusion with their adjusters, fell. It is recorded to the glory of the wisdom of the Ascension scheme that not a single member of the Satania Ascendant Citizenship resident on Jerusalem participated in the Lucifer Rebellion. Hour by hour and day by day, the broadcast stations of all Nebadon were thronged by the anxious watchers of every imaginable class of celestial intelligence, who intently perused the bulletins of the Satania Rebellion and rejoiced as the reports continuously narrated the unswerving loyalty of the ascending mortals who, under their Melchizedek leadership, successfully withstood the combined and protracted efforts of all the subtle evil forces which so swiftly gathered around the banners of secession and sin. It was over 2 years of system time from the beginning of the war in heaven until the installation of Lucifer's successor, but at last the new sovereign came, landing on the sea of glass with his staff. I was among the reserves mobilized on Urantia by Gabriel, and I well remember the first message of Lanaforge to the constellation father of Norlashiadek. It read, "Not a single Jerusalem citizen was lost. Every ascendant mortal survived the fiery trial and emerged from the crucial test triumphant and altogether victorious." And on to Selvington, Uversa and Paradise went this message of assurance that the survival experience of mortal ascension is the greatest security against rebellion and the surest safeguard against sin. This noble Jerusalem band of faithful mortals numbered just 187,432,811. With the arrival of Lanaforge, the arch-rebels were dethroned and shorn of all governing powers, though they were permitted freely to go about Jerusalem, the Urantia spheres, and even to the individual inhabited worlds. They continued their deceptive and seductive efforts to confuse and mislead the minds of men and angels, but as concerned their work on the administrative Mount of Jerusalem, their place was found no more. While Lucifer was deprived of all administrative authority in Satania, there then existed no local universe power nor tribunal which could detain or destroy this wicked rebel. At that time, Michael was not a sovereign ruler. The Ancients of Days sustained the Constellation Fathers in their seizure of the system government, but they have never handed down any subsequent decisions in the many appeals still pending with regard to the present status and future disposition of Lucifer, Satan, and their associates. Thus were these arch-rebels allowed to roam the entire system to seek further penetration for their doctrines of discontent and self-assertion. But in almost 200,000 Urantia years, they have been unable to deceive another world. No Satania worlds have been lost since the fall of the 37, not even those younger worlds peopled since that day of rebellion. Continuing in Paper 53, The Lucifer Rebellion, Part 3 of 3.